Hey, Martin Fournier on the mic for a big deep pots review. I will be reviewing basically 3.5 hands here, you will understand later. And I think those were really interesting spots that I'm going really in depth with. I hope you like it. And if you think that the first couple of hands are pretty long, it like the hand reviewing thing is getting shorter as the end goes on. Like the first hand is the longest and then it gets shorter. So don't discourage yourself too early. Enjoy. Hey ho hey. Okay, so hand number one, this is 10-20 deep on full tilt against two very good players, very aggressive, very excellent regs basically. We were battling three-way for like, I don't know, 30 minutes, an hour or so. And this hand came up. The game was super aggressive, basically with the button opening pretty much every time and one of the blinds repopping. The blinds basically repopping a lot and a lot of four betting going on and stuff. So this is the context. I don't have any like recurring theme for that video. All the ends are separate and they might or might not have been played in the same session. It's not really relevant. I'm gonna be discussing like different themes, but some things might come back from hand to hand, and I'll get some discussion with myself going on. So hope you enjoy it. So yeah, first hand, I've got Ace King. This one is about, well, I'll explain as the end plays on. So key money key opens minimum from the button. I obviously 3-bet from the blinds with my Ace King offsuit. And my name is Busto, who is a really good aggressive regular, 4-bets me from the blinds. And now right away I obviously have a decision. And the pre-flop decision is definitely really interesting here. You have the choice of either calling or 5-bet go broke basically. Folding is never an option. First thing you want to look at is the stats of the players, and he's got a 4-bet of 14%, which is really huge. And I know in this spot he's got a great spot basically to 4-bet me. He has position on me, and he knows since key money key is 100 big blinds deep that I will be 3-betting a lot from the blinds, much more than if key money key had 150, 200 big blinds like we do have. And he's got position on me and he's deep, so we can do a lot of things like that to basically shit on me with a lot of hands. I'm just in a really bad spot being out of position deep against him. One thing to know that is pretty important here is that he will basically have the position on me for like 2/3 of the time, and he's deep and I am deep and key money key is not. So I'm probably an underdog at this point in the game against two players. There's not much I can do if the guy that I have position on is not deep and the other guy is deep, and I'm deep with the guy who has position on me basically. So if you are looking to avoid variance or looking for plus EV spots, this is really important to know that you want to be in the position on the big stack, because it does allow you to make much more damage basically, and it will get you to avoid some big disgusting spots basically. So I'm probably an underdog, but I do like to play these games from time to time to practice basically for fun, and to practice to get better basically against good players. That's always a lot of fun. So I've got a pre-flop decision, and the standard would definitely be, with his 4-betting percentage being as high as it is, to just 5-bet and go broke, especially with Ace King off. Ace King suited might be better for flat calling, but at this point I really felt like he was doing a move on me, and I felt like by 5 betting, he, with the timings and stuff, he probably wouldn't do anything dumb, uh, like 6-bet fold or something like that. Just flow of the game kind of thinking. And I felt like I was pretty much losing value by 5 betting ace king here, even if I'm out of position. The principle behind flatting ace king here is that I will basically have a really misrepresented hand throughout the whole hand. I definitely assume at this point that he thinks that I will be 5 betting and going rogue with ace king 100% here. And that's really, really important because if the board comes ace high or king high, I know that this guy is likely to try to barrel me off a lot of things. So I will be losing the pot in spots where I should have won it by 5 betting. There are boards being out of position without the initiative that I will just not be able to do much on. If the board comes, I don't know, queen, 9, 8 with 2 hearts, I have nothing. I'm out of position in the 4-bet pot. I probably will lose the hand. But ace king is a lot more playable than people think out of position in these 3-bet or 4-bet pots. And if the board comes like all low cards, you're good enough to like check call, and then if an ace or a king comes, you're getting a lot of value because they will definitely barrel if their range is weak. And if it comes on the flop as well, if you're against an aggressive player, you're getting a lot of value there. So I am ready to lose the pot from time to time just to get some value out of his bluffs. You definitely want to do that kind of thing against people you know are going to bluff. You have to have a reason. It would be kind of dumb to flat here if I'm against a player who is not willing to bluff a lot post-flop and try to push me off big hands post-flop if an ace or a king comes, basically. Or if the board is all low cards, as I'm really planning to check calling maybe down my whole stack if it all comes low cards against him, sensing that he's going to be weaker than usual with all the pre-flop situation I explained. So you don't want to do this, like I said, even if the guy's aggressive pre-flop, but he's not post-flop, it's dumb to do that because the value, the money that you are losing by allowing yourself to lose the pot, basically, is like it's not going to be worth it compared to what he will be bluffing if he isn't it, because he won't be bluffing enough for you to make enough money to cover up your losses of the difference between 5 betting, basically. So I thought that this guy was a good candidate for me to try to misrepresent my hand and get him to make some big moves post-flop on boards that he will think help his range a lot, but will not help my range. And if the board comes ace high, another thing to note, I think he thinks that I'm capable of making big laydowns at 10-20 deep because it's not my regular game. I mean, my regular is 5-10, and he might think that I might not be willing to call 200 big blinds 4K here with like a6 low if the board comes ace high. So he's the type of guy you could try to make me fold ace low with a bluff super deep like that. And if he has like ace queen, he's definitely going to value his life on an ace high board as well. So he's likely to build me a big pot, basically. So he's perfect candidate, I think, for me to play that way pre-flop for all the reasons that I've mentioned. Flop comes king 10-5. That's basically perfect flop with me having the backdoor with the ace of clubs as well. And it's definitely interesting flop. I definitely am going to check because my plan is to get him to bluff a lot on exactly these types of boards. And when I check call here, my range is a lot of things that he probably thinks will be folding to multiple barrels. That's basically a perfect board for me because he probably doesn't think I have a king X that often because I'm more likely to flat my like king, queen, king, jack against a button opener. Most of the time, 100 big blinds deep. That's my default play, and he probably knows that. So I don't have really any king X that I would be 3-betting and then calling for bet with. And my big possible hands, I definitely have 10-10 in my range. Maybe 5-5 as well, probably. But it's not that big a part of our range, and there are a lot of draws. And I could have a lot of 10x with like, I don't know, 10-8 suited, queen 10 suited. I could take that line pre-flop, and I'm definitely going to have stuff like jacks and queens here a lot. So at this point, I don't really have any other possibility than going to check call, check call, check call. Because I'm against, like I said, an aggressive opponent who is capable of hand reading very, very well and is capable of putting pressure on me. You don't want to think that people can put pressure on you when they can't, basically. You don't want to try to apply this kind of thing to someone who is not going to bluff. You have to make the difference. There are people, even good players, who will never ever bluff 200 big blinds, basically. Like, they will always pussy out on the river. This is especially true at lower limits, even at 5-10, and even some regs at 10-20 won't ever do it. They always pussy out at some point in the hand. So against these players, you might try to take a different line and go for like tricky check raise here and hope he goes crazy with something like ace jack or ace queen as a gut shot and tries to represent a monster or whatever. But here, being against a big bluffer, that was my plan from the beginning, basically, to call out of position and check call on a lot of flops, even low boards. If the board comes, I don't know, 5 deuce, I'm definitely going to check call, and maybe check call again, depending on what comes on later streets. And it's important to note, too, that he's not going to 4-bet jacks, I think, here that often pre-flop. He's going probably to do it with queens, looking to go broke against me, but jacks is probably more likely to flat. And I've got a lot of blockers for aces and kings, so his range is definitely weaker, is definitely more lean towards the bluff range, because I do have ace-king myself, and most of his value hands are going to be ace-king, aces, kings, and queens, which he is going to have. So that's a plus for me to try and go for the slow play, basically, here. So I decided to take that line, and at this point, my idea is pretty much made up, unless the board comes to something crazy, like, I don't know, queen 9, or something like that on turn or river. But yeah, I don't really have against this guy, as I was planning the hand in my head. Pre-flop, I don't have any other option than to call, so I do call. Turn is a 9, which is definitely not the best card. He could have stuff like jack queen a lot, definitely. But as I said, his range is, I think, so much lean towards bluffs pre-flop because of his aggressive style, his 4-bet percentage, the fact that I have ace-king and the positions at the table that I mean, if he has it, just, well, fuck it, he's got me, that's it. I don't have anything else to do than to check out. So I check, and he bets again. Some people might get scared at that point that the board could come something disgusting like a jack or queen on the river, or an 8 would suck a lot too. But you have to take that risk, because raising here would basically make him fold all of his bluff, and it's just too bad. And even if, like, there's apparently no logical reason for me to raise here, but a lot of players, I think, will raise in those spots, even if they don't have any logical reason, just because the pot is getting so big and they kind of get afraid to lose it, because it happened at some point in the past that they got fucked on big rivers and big pots like that. So their first instinct when they're in the playing mode is to, oh shit, I don't want a board to go like disgusting and have to puke on the river, so I'm just gonna raise it here and fuck it if he has it. You definitely want to avoid these traps. You never ever want to make that kind of raise without any valuable reason behind it. You always want to keep your reasoning logical and go according to your plan most of the time during a hand. So I could see a lot of people raising here just because the pot is getting so big, and people tend to brain fart a lot in big pots, usually. So you want to stay cool-headed and go along with your plan here. So I check call. River's an 8 of clubs. It's once again definitely not the best card, but it does help a lot that I have the ace of clubs myself, so he has a lot less flush draws in his range. He would be forbidding a lot of ace-6 suited, I think, as bluffs. Plus, I don't, like, at this point, he probably thinks I'm on jacks or queens a lot, because I'm definitely going to check out twice with jacks or queens by picking up a gut shot on the turn. So this is a big part of my range. He could put me on something like, he could think I might have king queen or king jack from time to time, then I'm going to fold on the river. I don't have a lot of flushes in my range, just because I'm probably not calling the turn with any naked flush draw, because any naked flush draw that is in my range is probably ace queen or ace jack of clubs. I might have ace 10 of clubs. That would be one of the only ends that I'm check calling, but ace queen, ace jack of clubs, I'm definitely check raising the flop. And he could represent clubs very well himself, and he could think that I'm going to make big folds here, and he's got great odds on his bluff, so I think he will keep up bluffing every single time. He could have gotten there on the river with, I don't know, 6-7 is definitely part of his range. There are a lot less 2 pairs because he's likely to check back 1 weak pair at the point in the hand. He could have jack queen, he could have a low random flush, but like I said, his range pre-flop was really weak, and I feel like he's barreling a lot on these type of boards. So he shoves, and I obviously have to call. My call is a lot more easier because I do have the ace of clubs, but I think even without the ace of clubs, I think it remains a call because of my opponent here. It could be a fold against a lot of players if I don't have the ace of clubs, but not against this player, and you definitely want to keep in your mind who you are against in a hand and how likely they are to bluff 200 big blinds, because like I said, some people would just never ever do it. And I could, even with the ace of club, I could very well see myself taking exactly that line, but for other reasons against another opponent, just because I don't think he's ever going broke with worse than ace king pre-flop, and then I want to keep the pot small post-flop. And when the board turns like that, I could definitely see myself, like I said, folding to a river bit, because some players will never bluff those kind of spots so aggressively. But I played it that way because he's himself, and I was planning on check calling down, not for pot control reasons, basically. So I called, and he ends up turning over a bluff with ace jack offsuit, which is a great bluff on his part, and I'm folding a big part of my range, but I think it paid off really well pre-flop that I decided to misrepresent my hand against an aggressive opponent here. And it does pay me well for the future as well, because I know I'm going to be playing with this player a lot in the future. And what happens then is that he's a bit less likely to put so much aggression on me, because I've showed him that I can pretty much show up with not any two cards, but a lot of holdings he might not think I could have had in certain spots. So basically, now that he knows that I'm not likely to turn my hand face up regularly, he might be a bit less reluctant to put pressure on me in position. So that's also a big plus. You want to get to showdown a lot when you take these kinds of lines and stuff. So pretty interesting hand, I think, and it obviously turned out well for me. And I ship a big pot that I probably would not have shipped if I had gone with the 5-bet line. I think he just folds with the timings of the session. I don't think he's doing anything ever crazy here against a 5-bet. So yeah, that's it for hand 1. Hand number 2, it will look like the same kind of situation as hand number 1, with me flatting with ace king in a spot where my opponent doesn't think I'm flatting ace king, so I will take advantage of that. But I've done this one for completely different reasons than the other one, basically. And I think it's going to be really interesting to understand those reasons and go behind the thought processes that make hand number one so different than hand number two for the reasons that I will be explaining basically. So once again, it's 10-20 deep. I'm against Loco, who's a reg of these games, and our friend Samo/Neiman here. Good note here is that I'm in exactly the opposite situation than I was at the other time around, meaning that I do have the deep stack in position against the other deep stack and the 100 big blind or so in position on me. So I'm in really, really good shape, being even deeper than I was at the other tables. Loco is not, like, he's a high stakes reg. He's a reg of these games, 10-20 and 25-50, but he's a bit less good than I was giving him credit for at the point I played the hand. I played the hand like a week or 2 weeks ago, and I've played a lot against him since, and he's not that aggressive and not as good as I thought he was, basically. But he's still definitely a good aggressive regular. But he's not our opponent in the hand. Our opponent is going to be Neiman/Samo. And if you've been watching his videos, you pretty much know a lot how he thinks. And we definitely play back at each other a lot during our sessions. And he knows that I'm aggressive. And we know our styles pretty well, basically. So that's the background for the hand. And I think it was my very first hand at the table. I was just starting a session, basically. So no real dynamic, no real table flow or dynamic at play here, which is a difference from the other table when I definitely felt like my opponent was really weak when he 4-bet me for table flow dynamic reasons. And the fact that it was so aggressive. So, yeah, the button 100 big blind are so deep. Opens on the button. Yep, Loco. Neiman goes ahead and 3-bets him here. He's got a 3-bet percentage of 8% from the blinds, which I think is definitely good. It could be a bit higher. He could turn that up a bit, I think, to make it optimal against 100 big blinds players, but it's definitely high enough and it's tough to play back at. And something to note here is that his 4-bet percentage is a lot smaller than my name is Bastos was. So I have a decision here, and my decision, I'm going to flat, basically. I'll tell you right away, I'm going to flat the 3-bet. But it's for totally different reasons, and you want to know, you don't want to flat just to flat, basically, in that kind of spot. You want to know why you do it and plan your hand according to it. My reasoning here is that first, I don't think, like in the other hand, I don't think Neiman will think that I'm flatting with Ace King in this spot. He's probably thinking that I'm 5-betting and trying to go broke or just trying to play it fast pre-flop. So that's a plus for me. I will have a misrepresented hand against someone who is ready to put pressure on me, even in deep spots. So that's a definite plus post-flop. You want to show up. You want to be able to show up with these kind of hands, at least from time to time, for sure. So that's a plus. The other thing is, I'm absolutely positive that Neiman doesn't get into these 4-bet, 5-bet, 6-betting wars as much as some other regs might do. My name is Basto is one who is going to sometimes go and 5-bet or 6-bet and fall to a shove, being that deep. But Neiman is a lot less this type of guy. So by 4-betting, I think here I just lose all the value of my hand because I don't think he's ever going to do anything stupid out of position, and I will be having exactly what I am representing, which is definitely a minus for me being deep. A general principle that you want to keep in mind is that the deeper you are in poker, the more deception you want to do and the more misleading you want to do, because that will turn out to your advantage. You don't want to turn your hands face up against good players deep. That's basically the principle behind it. So I think flatting is a no-brainer. In the other hand, I could definitely have gone with the 5-bet and trying to go broke, and it's definitely EV really close to flatting. But this one, I think, 4-betting would be a really big mistake, especially being in position against Neiman. There's absolutely no merit in 4-betting, I think, for all the reasons that I've mentioned. It's my first hand at the table. Neiman is not going crazy on these 5-betting, 6-betting wars pretty much ever. He's doing it from time to time, but a lot less than some other regs. And he's not going to think that I will show up with that exact hand. So, yeah, and he's likely to put pressure a bit less than my name is Busto, I think. He's not likely to, like, try to make me fold big, like, ace-jack if the board come ace and breaks, and then try to present an ace-king and barrel his ass off. So that's less of a reason than against the other guy. But still, all the other positive notes just outweighs like the reason that I could see myself 4-betting for. So I flat and he folds. Once again, ace king suited would be better to flat here for obvious reasons, but I had the diamond and the heart at the time of the hand. So what do you want? Flop is a good one, not a great one, but a pretty good one. With once again me flopping the ace of the backdoor. That's going to be really important since it's going to cut a lot of his ace x flush draws, which could be a huge part of his range if the pot gets big at some point in the hand. And I do have a gut shot to some absolute nuts where I would not be representing that absolute nuts, basically. So he goes ahead and continuation bets into me. I do have a lot wider range than I had in the previous hand by flatting in position being that deep. I could have a lot of medium pairs that I had a lot less in the other hand. I could even have like jack 10 suited or stuff like that here, definitely being 250 big blinds deep in position against someone who I don't think is going to go that crazy anyway pre-flop by like 4-betting, bluffing, squeezing over here because I kind of look strong anyways. So I could have king queen suited, jack 10 suited, even queen 10 suited from time to time, those hands. So his c-bet doesn't tell me as much. He could just have ace x and trying to make me fold my 8-9 suited, that type of hands, or my middle and low pairs. So he's definitely not like uber strong at this point, but he's not uber weak as well. I think his range is weighted a bit stronger than usual because of the nature of the board and the fact that people tend to kind of automatically put other players on jacks and queens at that type of spot when they flat a 3-bet. Being deep, it's the first hand that pops into people's mind. So he's likely to be a bit stronger than usual because he probably thinks that my range is pretty strong on this board. So it's important to note for the rest of the hand. The turn is jackpot. I'm making a video, so I obviously run like God, as usual. And Neiman goes ahead and fires a bit once again into me. Here, this is, I think, the really, really important / interesting street of the video. If we were less deep than what we are now, I think raising would have absolutely no value, because if we were, I don't know, only like 150 or 180 or even 200 big blinds deep, and by flatting I would leave myself with around a pot size bet for the river. I think flatting would be a no-brainer because this is the kind of spot where an aggressive opponent like Neiman, I think, will definitely like bet pot as a bluff on the river or overship as a bluff a lot on the river. But the stack size are so important here because the pot has not been built up as much as the other was, and we are a bit deeper. So if I flat here, the pot is not even 2k, and we will have a bit more than twice the pot on the river. So I'm definitely likely to be missing a lot of value from some of his hands here. Unless I'm 100% positive that he's like going to ship two times the pot on the river trying to represent ace king because he doesn't think that I ever show up with ace king. But once again, I don't think Neiman is as likely to do that as some other players might be. I think and I'm going to give off one of my reads on Neiman at this point, but I think Neiman is a bit more on the passive side on the river street, and he's an excellent player who is crushing these games, but if I had to identify one leak of his, is that he might not be aggressive enough on the river in a lot of spots, either folding a bit too much or not bluffing enough in big pots like that. In big obvious spots he might do it, but in general I don't think he's aggressive enough on the river. So with that in mind, I don't want to flat and end up losing value against some of his stronger hands, because at this point I'm definitely confident that his range is basically pretty strong. He's not firing twice on that board against me with nothing at all. I don't think ever. Because when the 10 turns, I mean, my range is really strong, 2 pairs plus type of hands now. I do have ace queen a lot. If I have ace queen, he's probably betting the turn to ship again on the river, but I don't think it's that likely that he will go that crazy on the river with like a 2x spot. Like, the stack sizes would not be too great on the river for him to try a bluff. He won't have great odds on his bluff. So I didn't think he was going to go so wild here. So with that in mind, and with me thinking that his range is pretty strong, and it's probably 2 pairs himself, he's got a lot of 2 pairs, and obviously a lot of sets on this board, plus the fact that even if I'm pretty much never raising as a bluff here, it might play as kind of meta game that I could be raising as a bluff, because like he might think that I think that basically he might think that I think that by raising here, that's a spot where I would pretty much never raise as a bluff, because I could not quote unquote represent the nuts in a spot where you do want to have the nuts. So we definitely have been tangling with a lot of leveling and metagame at this point. So he's not automatically, with my image and the history that we have, he's not automatically going to put me on ace king here ever. Not ever, but not automatically, basically. So I do think that raising is good here, because I do want to build my pot, and I think his range is really strong. And he could try to go over the top and rebluff, trying to represent ace king himself, thinking that I might be turning some 10-9 type of hands into a big bluff here, because I do look so strong by raising. So it could be a good spot for me to bluff. So that was pretty much my thinking process on the turn. The biggest reason why I'm raising is stack sizes and the fact that I'm losing too much value on too many possible river cards, because I have the nuts and he has a nutsy type of range when he's barreling twice, I think, being the player that he is in that type of spot. So I decided to go for the small raise. Maybe I made it a bit too big. I didn't remember my sizing. I would much prefer like click it back. Just not that different. I did pretty much $100, but I think it might look weaker if I make it come like exactly click it back, because I've started clicking it back a lot as bluffs in those kind of random situations recently, and he knows it. He's seen it before, but still the sizing is not horrible either. It's small enough so that we have room and he might try anything. And he ships, and I obviously snap call, and he ended up not believing my ace king here and shipping as a semi bluff with the 5-6 of diamonds. So it definitely turned out really well for me, and I think he was a bit upset about on himself about the play. But I think by flatting pre-flop, I set it up really good that I definitely don't hate his play. I like his play because I will be bluffing in that kind of spot against him. So I really like his play, but I did end up showing with the nuts here. And it shows how much value I think you can make by flatting ace king in situations where your opponent doesn't think you're going to flat ace king. And even though, like I said, for all the reasons that I've mentioned, were definitely different reasons than in the first end, and the dynamic at the table was totally different. But I think you have a very wide range of reasons why you want to flat and why you don't want to slow play sometimes and why you want to slow play sometimes. And all the things that have to go in your mind in those kind of 3-bet, 4-bet pots in deep situations. So that's it for the first two ace-king hands, basically. Okay, so hand number 3. Totally different and unrelated to the first two hands. Completely different principles at work. And I think it will show one really big mistake that I see a lot of people doing, even good rigs, and I'll try to explain as it goes along. My poker tracker looks totally bugged, so fuck him. Okay, so I'm back, and poker tracker is back. So let's roll. Poker tracker is done. My life for all the manager, but I'm on a Mac. And so villain here is going to be a reservoir, but with what I want to explain in that hand, my read against the villain is not that important, basically. It's more of a general principle, a general idea that a lot of players get really wrong in a spot that arises quite a lot, and it's a spot where it's always a big hand with a big pot, and it's a spot where you don't want to screw up because you lose a lot of money when you screw up, basically. So he raises the cutoff. We are, let's say, 200 big blinds deep. I 3-bet with 8-9 suited, and the big blind could have flatted as well. I will mix up the two plays. I felt like 3-betting. I don't know why. It's been like a month or 2 months since I've played that hand, and I guess that opponent was better to 3-bet against, but it's not the team he calls. Flop is jackpot as usual because I run like God. I flop a flush draw and a pair. I could go into a check calling mode here, but I probably didn't feel like he was going to bluff so often if I did that. So I probably thought that going to bluffing / she might bluffing mode was better. This is a great board for me basically to go for 3 barrels normally here, because with the board being that drawy, I think most players, if they have 2 pairs plus on the flop, being that deep, will usually, if they have basically any hand that will call down a bluff, not any, but most of the hands that would call down 3 barrels, will raise on that draw of a flop, right on the flop, to balance with all the time that they will have big draws and try to go broke there. So they are definitely less likely to slow play something like a set or jack queen or king 10 suited or maybe king 9 suited here. So it's a great board to start barreling, and it's got a lot of like pair plus gut shot possibilities. So depending on how the board runs, I think once again great board and great stack sizes for me to bet, shove, if the board breaks out basically, and expect to receive a lot of folds. So that's the line I decide to take, with obviously a lot of outs, interesting outs with the flop. So I bet the flop, and he calls. Turn is total break, so I go along with my plan of trying to make him fold stronger made hands than mine because of the board texture, like I said. So I barrel the turn again, leaving myself, I think, with a small overbet on the river. I could have bet a bit more, like 30 more on the flop and 30 more on the turn or something like that, to have give myself a bit of better odds on my river shove, because it's a bit bigger than I would like it to be, but then again, by shoving here, you do get more respect. So depending on who you're playing against and how they are likely to view the overbet, like I ended up leaving myself what I think a bit of a bigger overbet than what I would normally prefer to. But I think it's definitely fine too, and it's tough to size that precisely when you're like 8, 10, 12 tabling, so I'm not mad at me for doing that. But this is the river I river my flush. This is the exact spot that so many players get wrong, and I will explain it right away. Most players in that kind of situation where they, either if they were planning on bluffing or whatever as a semi-bluff, and they hit something that they might not be representing, basically something that is pretty well concealed, will have a tendency to just bet big, either like pot or overshove as planned, and hope they get called, basically, because they pretty much have the nuts. But it's really, really shallow thinking, and I'll try to explain it as clear as possible in a sentence, that when you hit a card that helps your opponent's perceived range much, much more than it helps your own perceived range, and that card gives you a really good hand, you usually want to let your opponent a chance at bluffing at the pot. Here, in most people's mind, when that type of hands get played along, he is more likely to have a flush than me, basically. He is more likely to read me on ace, king, aces, kings type of hands, and he's more likely to be calling down with a flush draw, or 7-8, basically, that got there, and have hit that. That's the first point. The first thing is that you definitely want to leave your opponent a chance to bluff at this spot. And when I check here on the river against an aggressive player, I think he's one. I haven't played that much against him, but I think he definitely is one. Betting would be a really big mistake, unless you have some kind of read that by block betting he will shove you as a bluff. But I don't think there was any like good sizing for me to go with here as a kind of block bet. If we were deeper, I could definitely see myself betting like half pot and calling a shove. But I think here half pot doesn't leave enough money behind for him to think that he will receive a lot of fold to a shove. So I don't think he's going to be bluffing a lot here. So with the slight overbet, I think it's the perfect sizing if I check for him to overshove and hope to receive a lot of folds from aces, ace king type of hands, basically. That's fact number one. You always, always, always want to keep in mind what is your perceived range and your opponent's perceived range. And when there's a card that comes that helps your opponent's perceived range much, much more than yours, and he's aware of that fact and he's aggressive, you definitely want to give him a chance to bluff at it. And that would be true as well if I had another sort of big hand here, let's say kings or tens or king 10 or jack queen. It would be done to just like close my eyes and go, okay, let's bet and hope he calls with words, basically. Because another important thing here is that anything that would call a big bet is likely to value bet itself, basically. Any 2 pairs plus is definitely going to value bet the river because I do not look like a flush and he's in a great bluffing spot. So I could be hero calling and he's going to be confident with his end. So there's absolutely no value in betting, but I see so many people betting there just hoping to get called, basically, but it's very wrong for the reasons that I've mentioned, basically. So I think with those stack sizes, with how the board ran out, checking is absolutely my only option for the perceived range thing, plus the fact that on this exact board, Like I said at the beginning, he's likely to have a lot of pair plus gut shot type of hands, something like 10 jack, queen 10 suited, 9 jack, 9 queen suited, king queen, king jack. He's probably not going to bluff it with king queen and king jack, but I definitely see him turning 10 jack type of hands into a bluff on the river. So it's so heavily weighted towards cards that will not call a big bet but could bluff that betting has no value, like I said. So and the fact, like I said, that if I bet anything that would call a big bet is going to value bet itself anyways. So I check, I rightfully so check, and you want to recognize those spots and check in those spots for the love of God. It is such a big mistake to bet. It does not look like it's such a big mistake, but it's gigantic. It's, I think, worse than any Euro call gone wrong that you could do. So I check, and he bets 385, and that's a tricky sizing, and of course I'm going to ship here. I mean, there's nothing value in doing anything else, but I remember the river action pretty clearly. I decided that, I mean, if I ship pretty quickly, I'm never bluffing in that spot. It's so random. It would be so random as a bluff, so I don't think he's ever calling with worse. So I decided to do something kind of tricky and make pretty much the biggest Hollywood ever. I decided that my biggest chance of getting called here was to time bank for like a whole minute and then shove, because shoving is normally an easy thing to do if you are valuing here, so you're likely to do it pretty fast. And I know he's a thinking player from what I remember, so by thinking for so long against a blocking bet, he might view that as me going back with a bluff, because he's not likely to have a flush with that sizing or two pairs plus. Basically, most of the time he might have a weak two pair that is trying to get some value. So this is definitely his most likely holding. So he might think that if I think for like 2 minutes, he might go ahead and think that it takes me that time basically to realize that he might be folding some weak two pairs or king queen that this is going for thin value type of hands. So I decided to time my whole time bang and shove, and he ended up timing back a lot and calling with ace king. So he had ace king. I don't know why it's not showing up, and the fact that he had the ace of clubs pretty much killed him on the river probably, because I'm not going to show up a lot with a flush in the spot, so I ran pretty well with how the board ran out and stuff. And my fun thing to notice is that my bluff probably wouldn't have worked. He was probably calling down here, and he was pretty much doing me the trick that I was talking about in the first two hands, flatting ace king in a situation where your aggressive opponent is not thinking that you are going to flat ace king, and he was going to get a lot of value out of it if I did not bank the river, basically. So I think he played it really well, of course, and I like his river, like, weak bet, but it ended up working pretty bad for him because I ran really good. But the main thing about the hand is really the river check, for all the reasons that I've mentioned. You definitely want to check that kind of spot, recognize it and check it pretty much every single time. Anything else is dumb. You're going to balance it by checking it, and like so many ace king type of hands anyway in that spot, so it's definitely good. Okay, so one last hand. I wanted to get a couple more hands in, but as usual I ended up talking a bit too much and taking more time than I thought I would, so I probably have more hands for another video of the types. If you like it, that's perfect. One last hand in this one. This is a spot that you are not going to encounter a lot. Definitely not. Pretty much ever. That's pretty much the first time I encountered that spot. So what I'm going to do with this spot, I'm going to play it and give you my reads on players and timing and stuff like that. And then I'm going to leave the spot open for discussion, and we will be able to discuss it in the video discussion, because it pretty much took me like 5 hours to, I think, arrive at a good conclusion in that situation, in that exact situation. And I think it is a really good thinking exercise basically for a poker, for deep big pots in poker. And you want to do those from time to time, even if you're not going to encounter the spots. You want to practice your poker mind definitely, so that when you encounter that kind of deep, tricky spots, you are ready for it. So here it goes. I have deuces in the cutoff. Under the gun is going to be one of the players involved in that hand. I definitely remember not having many reads on him at the point of the hand, and I'm going to give you the reads that I had at the moment of the hand, so that's more interesting a bit, so that you could put yourself in my shoes basically. I didn't have that many reads other than he looks like a reg, and so far he's played like a pretty standard reg who is not doing anything too tricky. That's pretty much my read at the point. So nothing more than that. I expect him to play pretty well and pretty straightforward. So we're super deep at 510, over 300 big blinds, so I decided to 3-bet my deuces, which is really standard being that deep. I've got a good hand to call the 4-bet with in position and try to basically set mine. And I do want to build pot and put a lot of pressure in position with a hand that has definitely a good drawing potential. And only flatting kind of sucks here, because if you flop a set in a single raised pot and the pot gets really big, it's likely to not be good, because it's always obviously going to be bottoms up. And interesting thing here, Bondar flats, and as you can see by his stats, he was pretty much the mark at the table. Definitely not a good player. I did not have like exact reads on the fish. Sometimes you get those big reads on the fish because they do allow you to get some big reads on them. And sometimes you know that he's always like putting when you check to them or stuff like that. But I just knew that he was bad basically. I was multi-tabling a lot, and I've seen him do stupid stuff, but not anything clear that I could take advantage of, basically. So that's pretty much my read. I just know that he sucks. That's a definite plus. I had him marked as a fish from an earlier session. So he's a fish, basically, but not a fish that I have a great read on, which is kind of unfortunate. Fold, call. Flop comes king, 6 deuce. I do run good, obviously. The reg checks. I fire a pretty good, well-sized bet. And I'm going to leave basically every street open for discussion. I could have a lot of things to say about my sizing on every street, and every street's decision could be discutable, basically, definitely. But I'm going to leave everything open for discussion, because I think it will make a good exercise for everyone to think about. So I bet 240, fish calls, reg calls. Turn is 9 of spades, check. I bet 775, the reg calls, the fish calls and the reg calls. Timings, that's really important. I remember really well when I bet 775, the fish insta calls like in a second or so, and the reg tanks for like a minute, like 45 seconds before calling. So those are the timings on the turn, and I think they are pretty important in your decision making on the river. River is the 5 of spades. Gets checked to me, and now I have a decision. What should I do? You are going to try to answer, and we will have a fun discussion. So if you want to take part into that, go in the comment section of the video, or in the forums, which is basically the comment section of the video, and do the exercise, and we will try to come up with an answer as accurate as possible, basically, for that spot. So hope you enjoyed the video. I probably will be making another one quite like that in the near future, because I did have some more hands that I wanted to talk about that I did not get in. So give me feedback on anything if you think that I'm talking a bit too much about the hands, but I did want to review every single spot really in depth and really in detail, because I don't get a lot of time to do that when I'm doing my live sessions. So it's a bit different, and I like it. So if you like it, tell it. If you think I'm rambling a bit too much, tell it. I'm open for any criticism. So hope you enjoyed it once again. Think about the hand and what you should do here. Goodbye.